Hi everyone, it's Smash Mackenzie here, and with these videos that I tend to do, I raise awareness of unpaid carers, that is, those who care for someone unpaid, obviously, and the person that they're caring for is living with long-term ill health, whether it be mental health or physical health. That's usually the focus of my videos and blogs. But today I am going to present on strategies to deal with depression. And this is something that not only where a carer is perhaps caring for someone going through depression, but these things can actually hit unpaid carers themselves. And I've been through it. And it's something that creeps up on you, to be honest. You're doing the best in your role that you can try and do, but unfortunately there are and will be things outside your control. One of them is the nature of who you're trying to care for, in regards to the symptoms they have. Now let's get into it. What are these 20 or so strategies that carers can use, or perhaps anyone, in order to deal with depression? So the first thing, let's go back. To be honest, the first thing I mentioned is dealing with depression. Really, you can emphasize the focus on self-care. And what I will present is just practical steps that can improve your own mental well-being. Failure to ignore, well, if you're ignoring depression, failure to recognize depression can lead to mental health symptoms in unpaid carers. And I always sort of say this to carers, whether they're in my groups or some that ask me for advice regarding these things. I say, don't ignore it. Do challenge what you're going through. There are steps to counter forms of depression. And this is basically what I've just said, to be honest. If you feel you're going under depression, and what I mean by depression is low mood, basically. You're struggling to do the routines of things that you enjoy doing, mainly down to what I've mentioned here, feelings of sadness. You're looking back at the past in your caring role. There's been lots of arguments, lots of struggles with services, and things like that can get anyone down. So you're feeling frustrated, you're exhausted, you can't really get any sleep, you're not eating properly. These are perhaps signs of depression. And do know this is, when I say acknowledge your feelings, I'm saying challenging stigma, basically. It's not ashamed. You don't have to be ashamed of being depressed. It's one of those things that carers go through. They struggle. So you can put these down as valid and normal. And that's the first step in dealing with depression. Acknowledge that it's there, that it exists. Once you've acknowledged depression, you can look to seek forms of social support. Let others know about it, but I do mean also be choosy in who you let know about your situation. Usually close friends, family, or even support groups. They can share your experiences and reduce the isolation. The worst thing that can happen to anyone is not only that they can become depressed, but they're isolated within their situation, which means they don't get any help. When also mentioning join groups, you can actually look for local carer groups, the local care centres, or even online groups. I run quite a few online groups specifically aimed at unpaid carers. And the reason for trying to join carer support groups is to gain emotional support and practical advice. There may be other carers that have or are going through forms of depression, anxiety, those types of things, but they might have found ways to deal with it. The other thing is practicing self-compassion. The mind is a mysterious thing. You don't know what it's doing until you begin to realize it's actually ebbing away at your well-being. So again, the first step with this is avoiding self-criticism. Remind yourself that you can only really do your best in a challenging role. And don't get me wrong in this one. Um, Caring for someone with long-term ill health can be very challenging, but it's important to also practice self-compassion. I'll look into examples of this perhaps in another lecture. But as a reminder, the mind, left to its own devices, can cause people to think negatively about themselves. This one is difficult, but it's also very important. Um, when you're caring for someone, it is important to not let yourself get overwhelmed. So learning to say no, basically, to additional responsibilities, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed, you've got to take time out to look after yourself. It's not being selfish. You're only one person, and that person you're trying to care for actually does rely on you, but you have to set boundaries. The other thing you can do, and I think this is perhaps one of the easiest things really, is take regular breaks if you can. But there usually are ways to do it. I'm not saying take breaks to have a holiday. One, you can't afford it, and two, is the time right to do so if you're caring for someone. So if you can schedule short breaks during the day, late afternoon, so you can take away from yourself from that situation, whether it's a rest or engaging with activities that you enjoy. That's linked to taking a break. Explore forms of respite care where you can arrange for temporary relief, care worker agencies, respite care services, allowing you time to recharge and also take a break. The other thing is engage in mindfulness. It might sound a bit corny, sitting there trying to be mindful, but it does work wonders if you do this right. So practicing mindfulness or meditation can help in managing stress and get you to focus on the present rather than negatively reflecting on the past or worrying about the future through anxiety. All those things, those habits can eat away at your well-being. The other thing also is not just mental, there are physical activities that are so important. Even a light walk can help boost your mood. It's all related. Mental and physical well-being, it's all related. So these things can reduce feelings of depression, and it could, be just 10 minutes, walk in the park. Start slow, start short, and increase that as you go along. But it's not just what you're doing, it's what you're putting into your body. So if you can focus on nutrition, eat a balanced diet to maintain that energy levels, this can in turn support not only your physical health, but your mental health. And I know again, it's tempting to eat fast food when you just don't have the time. But if you plan in advance, you're less likely to eat on the spur, if you know what I mean, on the spur of things. Not always easy to do, but if you can, prioritize in getting regular sleep. Set a schedule to combat fatigue and emotional burnout, which in turn leads to raised levels of depression. So getting regular sleep um, is one of the focus things that you should try and do if you're caring for someone. This can be slightly difficult, but when things do get out of hand, and you want to do this before things do get out of hand, try reach out to a therapist or wellbeing counselor. Those experience in supporting low mood in carers. And usually, again, care centers can actually provide well-being services. They may have a therapist or counselor on site, so it's worth trying to ask around if you can get access to one. And I've just mentioned care centers. This again is a good example as the reason really to use those care resources. Don't feel that you have to cope by things by yourself, alone. One of the worst situations to be in as a carer, and I do see this unfortunately with carers, perhaps who are strong-willed, but are needlessly not using the resources that can actually help them. So if you can utilize services like care helplines or local care centers, care organizations to gain access to guidance, advocacy, and emotional support. And there's a lot more other things than just that. Again, it's practicing the gratitude. The reason for this is not just what you're thinking automatically, but actually writing down a gratitude journal to shift focus towards positive aspects in life. Now, I know this might seem a bit controversial, but there usually, most of the time, is something positive that has happened to us each day. The challenge is, can you actually look for that? Can you find it? And there usually is things that we can journal about that reminds us to stay on track and be positive about things, no matter how small. Again, taking time out to pursue your hobbies, your interests, that actually bring you joy and distract from stress or depression. And it doesn't have to be, as I mentioned, a walk in the park. I'm pointing to things, you know, online game maybe, building things, hobbies or things that are of interest, reading books perhaps, or even writing, which is what I sometimes try and do. I think this encompasses all of what I've mentioned, trying to create a daily routine to add a bit of predictability and reduce forms of depression and anxiety. With all the stuff that I've mentioned before, if you can schedule them, then you feel that you have some control over the situation. I'm not saying this is 100%, but it's always good to try and develop routine, develop a plan, so you're not in for any nasty surprises. This is perhaps one of the most difficult one, to be honest. Sharing your feelings and needs with the person or the person that you're trying to care for to prevent misunderstandings and resentment. Why can this be difficult? Because to be honest, we're looking into forms of communication, especially if you're trying to communicate with someone living with mental distress. Because obviously you're not trained, it's worth inquiring. How can you learn to communicate with someone, especially regarding your needs? It can start small, and you're just trying to say to that person, you can only do so much, and you do need time for yourself. But if that person is living with very chronic forms of mental ill health, this might not be easy to achieve, and you may need to find an advocate to help you communicate your needs. This one is a bit of a no-brainer. Sometimes we can be pulled into situations where we want a quick fix to feel better, and this can be alcohol or forms of drugs. But in the long term, it can worsen depression. So avoid self-medication. Um, this in turn will avoid you, trying to get you away from situations where you're risking your own mental well-being. This might seem a bit corny, but it actually does work. I always say start small, short forms of deep breathing. It could be just for 5 minutes. every 2 days, and then you increase the length of time you're doing it. But if you're going through depression, anger, forms of anxiety, you may notice that your breathing either quickens. So using deep breathing exercises can actually help calm your mind and reduce stress during those tough moments of unpaid care. And the last one, but one of the most important ones, is to acknowledge and celebrate small achievements, whether it's in the caregiving role or the person that you're trying to support. So I hope, these 20 strategies, coping strategies, can be useful in combating depression. As a reminder, one or two of those strategies can be difficult. I admit that, but if you plan um, and bring them all together, then there's no reason why you can't combat forms of depression. It's only fair that you are given the chance to look after yourself. If you're enjoying this video, please do give it a like, subscribe to my channel. I know I've been away for a while, I've not been so well, but I'm glad to be back again, promoting forms of carer awareness. Thanks for watching.